Hello and welcome back to a very special interview with an inspiration segment. With me today, helping me on this interview, is our resident Deadlands roller, Ron. Hey, Ron, thanks for joining us, man.
No problem.
In this interview, we're going to speak with the Deadlands creator and president of Pinnacle Entertainment Group, Shane Hensley. Shane, thank you for speaking with us today.
Thanks for having me.
It truly is a pleasure and an honor. When we kind of entertain the idea of Deadlands on our Discord server, people jumped right to it. So it's definitely a big deal, and it's a definite well-known game. So let's kind of start off by you just kind of telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got into role-playing games.
Sure. Well, I started in RPGs when I was probably 14 years old. For those of you who weren't around back then, I actually ordered my D&D set through the Sears Wish Book for Christmas. That was the old red and blue boxes. So I played for a long time, played in college, and eventually I wrote something for a game that I had just gotten into called Torg, and I sent it in, and it was a Halloween adventure, in fact, that I'd run for my friends. And I was lucky enough that they accepted it, showed me all the many things I had done wrong. I fixed them, sent it back in, and it was published, and that really set me off on a career I had never expected. So I was in school for history and political science, and wound up going to graduate school and doing some other stuff. But all through that, I was writing games and working with TSR and West End and FASA and White Wolf and the Department of Agriculture and all kinds of weird things. And years later, I had this idea stuck in my head that became Deadlands, and we published it, and here we are.
Very interesting. So one of the things I looked at when we were kind of doing some research on you, we're doing some recon on you, so to speak. We saw that you used to own a comic book shop, and I'm interested to learn from you how much comics have inspired you in the creation of games, and did you kind of envision Deadlands as a comic book before making it a game?
So I'm a comic book nerd from 4 years old, right? I was reading Spider-Man probably from, issue 50 or 60 or something, and still do. There are lots of little things from comics that have worked their way into our stuff, some subconsciously, some very directly. Some interesting little ones. There was a villain called Faust or Dr. Faustus in Marvel Comics. So, when I was younger, I looked up who the real Faust was, and I learned about Faustian bargains and all this stuff. And I thought, that's really cool. And Deadlands, at the corner or at the center of all of the Deadlands universe, it's a Faustian bargain. If you're a huckster, you're dealing with demons for power, right? And that idea of getting something, but there's a cost to it, I just found far more interesting than I can just cast spells or something. Kingpin's wife Vanessa is absolutely an inspiration for Dr. Hellstrom's wife Vanessa in Deadlands and Hell on Earth. And again, sometimes I do this stuff consciously as a little nod or a show of my love for the comics I grew up on. Sometimes it's subconscious and I just forgot them. That one was conscious.
That's awesome.
Did I envision Deadlands being a comic? I actually envisioned it being an animated show. So when we debuted, Spawn had just come out on HBO as an animated adult cartoon. And we came up with a treatment and a story around this guy called the Cackler. And we never could get that animated show to take off, obviously. But we did eventually do the Cackler story in a trade paperback that you can find on our website or you can order through comic retailers. And that tells the story. And who the Cackler was kept secret from our fans for about 15 years or so before we finally revealed it. And I won't spoil the secret here for those who might be new to it, but it's pretty cool, and it links the current Deadlands to some of the new Deadlands spin-offs that are coming soon, like Deadlands Dark Ages.
Very interesting. Yeah, I personally love comic books as well. And I actually have seen some of the Deadlands trades at my local comic shop, Third Eye Comics in Annapolis, Maryland.
Awesome.
And I've always wanted to pick it up, and I'm not big into the Western genre, but learning about the game makes me want to read more of the comics.
Cool.
And the idea of the huckster, when I played the game with Ron, we're about to start a campaign soon. When I play the game with Ron, I want to look into being a huckster, because the idea of a huckster back then, whereas magic is the devil and things like that, I'm interested in to see what I can get away with, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it was pretty neat. I didn't originally envision hucksters exactly as they are. We had, kind of a Wild West wizard idea, but we got a piece of art in the early days where this guy was, he's hurling a card almost Gambit-like, right? There's another nod to comics. And we just started thinking about, well, what's he doing? How does he get this power? Who is he? What should we call him? And because we wanted magic to be something you probably had to hide from the authorities, almost like, witches in the Salem period or something, they had to kind of hide behind something else. So what could it be? Well, they're poker players, right? So they pretend they're playing, well, and then they do play poker and they're shuffling their cards. But really, they're sitting there thinking about all these bargains they're going to make with dark powers to give them power.
So I wonder too, just like a follow-up question, how did you personally have you always been a fan of sort of like cowboy culture, like the Old West style Civil War era American history, or how'd that sort of become your focus?
So I would say I'm really just like everybody else. I mean, I'm a fan of 1,000 things, right? I've got Flash Gordon, Dark Sun posters on my wall. I love everything. My love of Westerns really came from watching them with my dad. We'd watch John Wayne Westerns together back when, there were 3 channels, and that's what you watched on a Sunday after church or whatever it is you did on a Sunday. So I didn't really find out about spaghetti Westerns and Clint Eastwood movies until I was probably in college. I mean, I knew about them, but I didn't really watch them or get into them. And somewhere between thinking about Deadlands and the original Brom painting that became Necropolis Atlanta for White Wolf, all of that kind of came together. The toughness of John Wayne, the style of the spaghetti Westerns, and my love of horror and the supernatural and fantasy, really. We call it a Western fantasy, or a Western horror fantasy. So that's where it came from. And what I love about the Western genre as a horror fan is a big part of horror is isolation, right? It's tough to be scared if you're in a mall surrounded by people, or if you can just call the police and have them handle it or whatever. So the frontier, the Western, that's the quintessential. You are on your own. You can't look up on YouTube how to put a bracket on a wall, right? You got to do everything yourself, including survive.
Yeah, that's interesting because I also think that one of the biggest things about horror is isolation, and I actually talked with Mike Mason about that as well, asking about space themed Call of Cthulhu games, and when I think of horror, I think of the isolation of, say, the Aliens movies, where they're just stuck in space. There's nowhere they can go. I never actually took into consideration the isolation of being stuck in the middle of the desert at night, and it goes from 110 degrees to below freezing within a day. So that's interesting. That is really interesting. That's a cool
little known
insight.
fact for those of you who don't live in the desert. That's kind of a Mojave thing, where it's super hot in the day and super cold at night. Here where we live in Arizona, it gets hot in the day and stays hot at night.
Oh man. I'll stick to Maryland, I guess. You get all the seasons, I guess. So in a nutshell, can you tell us what the difference is between the original Deadlands and Deadlands Reloaded? We find that our players prefer Reloaded over the original style.
Are we talking system or content?
Yeah, system. System mostly.
So, the original content, the system, Deadlands Classic is what we call it now. I had all these dice like everybody else, and I wanted to use them all, and I wanted to roll big handfuls of them. And that's where it started when I was 20-something years old and wanted to make all this. And what we were really going for, the core of that system, was to be able to do a scene like you might see in the Outlaw Josie Wales, where he draws his pistol and shoots 5 guys, right? Bam, 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 bam. We wanted it to be chunky. We wanted the damage to feel like a bullet hitting home, and it was painful and gross and gory and all that stuff. So years later, 2 years later, we created Deadlands Hell on Earth. And now you've got fully automatic weapons and grenade launchers and APCs and airstrikes and artillery and all this kind of crazy stuff, right? So breaking things down to such a minute split-second round as we kind of did in Deadlands Classic became very complicated. And if you were immersed in the system, just like any other game, you could pull it off just fine, right? But it definitely required a higher learning curve and more expertise than we were really happy with. So in the meantime, we had created a miniatures game called the Great Rail Wars that did really, really well. And the system for it is pretty much what you play in Savage Worlds now, or in Deadlands Reloaded. So you've got, you know, D4, D6, D8, D12, D10, D12, and you roll those along with a wild die if you're a hero, and you're looking for a 4 or better, right? That's really the crux of our entire system. Initiative is based on cards, which lets us do all kinds of neat things, like if you get a Joker special, stuff happens, that kind of stuff. And simplifying the system let us more easily add all that other crazy stuff I was just talking about, like fall auto attacks or, you know, armored vehicles, that kind of stuff. Keep the combat really fast. So when we were playtesting it, for example, we were actually playtesting Game of Thrones. And my friend had started a Game of Thrones campaign using GURPS, which I love. But the moment a fight broke out in GURPS, you know, we were there all night. And again, that's not a slam on it. I love GURPS. But as we were making Savage Worlds and we switched over to it, not only did the fights go really fast, but I was the young noble, kind of like a young Robb Stark kind of guy. And my head of scouts could actually have all his scouts present. My champion woman that kind of defended me, suddenly she could have a King's Guard with her, right?
Mm-hmm.
We could have all these other characters if we wanted to go on a, you know, kind of a sortie or a mission against the bad guys, and they could have all of their forces. And I remember we had this big running cavalry battle in a narrow stream one day with probably 40 figures on the board. And we just had this huge, wonderful, awesome time. And we thought, man, this is cool. And we had just as much depth in the role playing and the characters as we did when we were playing, you know, D&D 3 at the time. So that's when it really clicked, and I thought, you know, this is something different, and I like it, and I want to play it.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. So since you are the creator, I'm sure that you've been a GM for many, many times, for many Deadlands games. When you play as a game master, are you more narrative based or rules based when guiding the story?
I've told this story many times, but I think it's worth telling again, regardless of which game or what game you play or what rules. I run most of my sessions very narratively. We just talk, things happen. I'm going to ask you to roll some dice, and the dice for me kind of give 4 results. Critical fail, fail, success, big success, right? And we're going to key off of those things as a group to say, man, that was really cool. Let's explain a little bit about how awesome you look when you flip off the back of the truck to shoot the ninja or whatever. Right? Versus you critically failed, you jump off the truck and you broke your leg, and now it's something you've got to deal with for the rest of the scene, right? But what I love, and coming from the miniatures game Great Rail Wars, like I mentioned a moment ago, when we have to break down to a tactical fight, the rules are there for you. So the story I've told many times, when I really consciously understood what was going on, I was playing a Weird War Rome game in Colorado with a game master named Neil Hyde, who's running a bunch of great events at our Halloween online con this weekend. But we were confronted by this ancient dragon thing, right? No way we can beat this thing. We're we're legionaries. And we're kind of negotiating with it. We're having fun. We're role playing. You know, it gives this big speech about how it was old when Atlantis sank into the waves and all this crazy stuff. It's just this really cool moment. And we either join it or he unleashes his horde of serpent men on us. Okay. So if it had been purely narrative, we'd have made a deal and we'd have had a good time and we'd have walked on, right? No problem. But we had the tactical rules there for us. And Neil showed us, here are the things that are going to attack you. Well, we're legionaries. We have these edges that mean that if I'm standing next to you with my shield, we get this extra bonus and stuff, right? And we actually gamed it out, and it was one of the most tense, fun, crazy battles that I've ever played. And it really showed me that was, let's make our bed, and then we have to lie in it, and it comes with all the risk that that we've accepted, rather than just, again, tell a story and we say, well, we fight our way out valiantly, but we escape or something, right? That would not have been as satisfying as sitting there and gaming it out. You don't always have to do that, but it really, really cemented it there for me, why I love having a narrative game with a crunchy foundation.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I find really rewarding is you sort of have the option. Like, say you're running low on time, you're
Yep.
playing with your friends, it's been 6 hours, people got to go home.
Right.
Here, we could sort of narratively solve this conflict, or we could get really into it and
Yep.
really go after these pluses, minuses,
Right.
what happens. That's
Yep.
one of my favorite things.
Nice. So it seems as though you do still play the game. Do you
Oh, yeah.
ever? You don't get burnt out playing it at all?
I don't.
That's
And I do
awesome.
play lots of other stuff. I just played in a Magpie curated game of Cartel the other night, for example, and I had a great time. But inevitably, I do always just want to play our game because it's got all the stuff I like in it.
Exactly. I mean, yeah. I mean, you made it to where it's something that you like, and it's something that other people like. Might as well, right?
Seems to be working.
Yeah, I'm sure you get a couple liberties there too when you are playing with the creator of the game. So when you play as a character, right? What kind of character do you pick, or do you just whatever you're feeling that day, or is there a go-to character that you like to
So,
play?
back in my D&D days, I really liked playing like a fighter thief, a sneaky type who could fight his way out of a situation if he needed to. But I'd say from my 30s on, I really enjoy just role playing whatever comes my way. And I often at a convention or even on our online convention this week, I'll take whatever character's left after everybody picks. And I'm not just doing that to be polite because I'm the creator and I get to play a lot more than a lot of these people. But it often makes me take characters that I probably wouldn't have picked and play them. So if you get to watch the game I played in last night was Savage Willy Wonka, a post-chocolyptic nightmare. I wound up with Augustus Gloop, which was the heavier kid who was wouldn't stop eating sausages and so on. And I wouldn't have picked that character. I probably would have picked Mikey, or Grandpa Joe. But yeah, it was a blast. And I've played every gender, sexual preference, critter you can imagine in games, and I enjoy it. And that kind of lets you walk in somebody else's shoes for a little while, So that's good too.
Definitely, yeah. A little escape from your regular everyday life.
Yeah.
When you live your life every single day, it can get a little humdrum.
Right. Yeah.
So the fact that we
I do kind of. Yeah, I do kind of prefer less powerful characters because I like to use my wits and situation and stuff rather than just, I've got the biggest gun or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. Those are fun too. I've played Glitter Boys in Rift several times and it is fun.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. When I first started playing, I definitely had a tendency to go towards, your meteor sort of like, oh, this guy's combat is insane. He's going to be able to blow things up. He's going to be able to take out 8 guys.
Sure.
But sometimes, yeah, it's way more fun to just sort of test the limits of like your wit or persuasion or to play a less sort of beefy character.
Yeah.
I agree. And with Savage Worlds Deadlands being very popular on YouTube nowadays and other streaming sites for playthroughs, how does it feel when you see your creation reaching, so many different audiences through so many different mediums? Like, I'm sure it gives you a lot of pride.
Yeah. I guess, probably 20 years ago, Deadlands will be 25 next year. Probably 20 some years ago when I saw people running it at conventions, I think that's when I had that moment. Wow, this is going to last for a little while. This isn't just a, throw it in the bargain bin after you read it a couple times kind of game. And I never ceased to be amazed when I see people around the world playing it, or like the Wild Cards gang playing it, or the Critical Role Undeadwood show, or any of that stuff. So yeah, it's a real treat, and especially when you see them. This doesn't make me mad. It makes me happy when you see them do stuff better than you do, right? And I can learn from it and put it into my next game. That's fantastic.
Yeah, the Critical Roles on Deadwood, was my first taste of anything like that.
Yeah.
And it was basically an 8-hour Quentin Tarantino style gritty movie, and I loved it.
Yeah.
Those guys are amazing actors, let alone role players, right?
Right.
So I guess that you kind of answered our second lead-off question with that was you feel okay when people take liberties, with
Absolutely.
your creation? Okay.
I think one of the weird things when I play in games, people think that they have to follow every rule and do everything just right? And I don't even do that. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes because I've forgotten something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. You're there to have a good time and laugh and tell a good story. What I do appreciate though is when the rubber hits the road, when you get in that situation like I mentioned a few moments ago, that's where a little rules mastery is good, right? Because it is highly play tested. It does work well together. And if you're going to say you're going to have to take your chances here, then it needs to be somewhat fair, right? If it's unbalanced or unfair, that's not as cool. Or if one character dominates everything because he took this particular path and nobody else is as cool, that kind of sucks.
Yeah, and so we didn't tell anyone on our Discord who we were. We just said we have a big interview coming up. It might be bigger than the ones that we've already done here, and it has to do with Deadlands. If there was one question that you could ask, what would it be? And there was a couple different questions, and we've kind of mixed them into some questions here, but this is one that Ron came up with that I've never heard of, and it seems different than any of the other systems that I've seen. Ron, do you want to ask the question?
Yeah, I can ask this one. So I'm a rules guy. I like my question was sort of like, I've kind of always been curious about the hindrance called like the old ways. And I've had like friends who have used this in game, and sometimes it's been hard to sort of find like a middle ground to like playing this hindrance out, because you don't want the character to be so overwhelmed by the technology gap. Just like the hindrance, I feel like could be very impactful to the player's just health in general. So I was wondering, when you created this hindrance, or when whoever came up, or when you were play testing it even, how you saw it being used in game, and do you see it continuing to be used as Deadlands moves forward in the timeline, or what are your feelings on it? This is sort of just a pet question of mine.
Sure. So first off, never had any trouble with it. Okay, but I will take your question as intended. When I came up with it, the idea was, why would the Sioux in particular stick with bows and arrows and horses when we've got velocipedes and Gatling guns and all this kind of stuff running around, right? Because we didn't want them to be just another. We didn't just want to put them on steam wagons with Gatling guns. I mean, everybody else already has that. So then you have to have two things. You have to have, why did they do that, and what do they get by not doing it, right? So the why, of course, is they want to be, they want to honor their ancestors and the spirits that they live with and they believe in on a daily basis. And depending on which iteration of the rules we're talking about, that manifested in different ways. So especially in Deadlands Classic, for example, there were spirit animals. You could have a spirit guardian that benefited you. The shamans had all kinds of powers. The braves could get certain blessings and so on. And they would be very much equal to a mad scientist with a flamethrower or a cowboy with 2.6 guns. And I thought that worked great. Again, that was the Deadlands Classic system, which is certainly a little more complicated. I would say in the Deadlands Reloaded era, we kept all that, but we also added in the Sioux Nations, after the Last Sons plot point campaign, technology doesn't work in the Sioux Nation. It falls apart.
Yeah.
And in the new edition that we just came out with, I think we've taken all of that, although Spirit Guardians haven't been put back in yet. and made it even easier to use, faster to understand. It's less intrusive, but it's actually even more impactful. So in the box set Horror at Headstone Hill, for example, one of the things the bandits do if you get on their tail too closely is they go running into the nations because they know a modern posse's guns will start falling apart once they get over there. So I think first off, to summarize that, we wanted to make them feel like the Indians of the Old West, who believed in animal spirits and nature and that kind of stuff, perhaps more iconic and tropey than in reality. And then we wanted to make sure that was worthwhile in the game. So if you played one of those characters, as I mentioned a minute ago, you felt as cool as everybody else.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that also like sort of gets into one of my favorite personal things about just the whole setting is how you've taken like all the different sort of like groups that existed in real history in the Old West, and you found a way for them to fit, whether it be like the Chinese immigrants out in California that existed like during the railroad building era, things like that. And it's sort of interesting to see hindrances and edges that focus around these specific groups that
we try. And I'm a big history nut. I've got a degree in history, but a lot of people have degrees in history, but I read voraciously. All these books behind me, that's probably a fifth of what I've read, not just on the Old West, but a lot of stuff. But I live out here, I visit, I talk to people of many different backgrounds and try to understand their points of view. And we try to walk a fine line between maintaining the tropes of the Old West, which is what people come to the game for, right? I mean, at some level, as cowboys and Indians, we just let you see it from the cowboys and the Indians side, right? And especially in today's society, that's more important than ever. But I think we've done it from the beginning. We've not always been perfect about it, for sure. And we grow and learn like everybody else. But all those groups you mentioned, they have cool stories to tell. And I think we just want to make sure playing any of them is fun. That's our main emphasis, and respectful. Fun first.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And another question that we were asked a lot on the Discord server had to do with removing the Confederacy from newer iterations of Deadlands. How did you and your team come up with that decision, and have the fans been supportive of that?
So this one really wasn't a team thing. This was all me. So the team agreed. I don't want to take any of that away from them. But the team was pretty invested in the continuity that they had helped create over the last 20-some years. So it was tough for them to change that. So just to be clear, for those who don't know who don't know any of the subtleties, we didn't take the Confederacy out. We were going to end the war very soon anyway in continuity. We just ended it about 13 years back. And we also did it in a way that it's important to me. Nobody else may care, but there's a story reason that history changed. It's called the Morgana effect. It has to do with the Cackler and Dark Ages and all that kind of stuff. So it's a butterfly effect kind of thing. But let's not pretend that it also wasn't done for game and cultural reasons, right? So there's a long explanation of all my different thoughts and feelings of this on the official Savage Worlds Facebook page. It may be on our page somewhere, although I couldn't find it yesterday. It was certainly met with a lot of resistance by a lot of people. And some people will say, Pinnacle, they bowed down before blah, blah, blah. Well, it's me. I did it. I chose it. And I'm a political conservative, okay? But I chose this. I wanted it to be. And here's what it really boils down to. Let's say I'm running a game somewhere and I've got a Texas Ranger in my party and I've got an African-American guy playing a black guy from the Old West at the table, right? I don't want those two to have to look at each other and think, what is their relationship? You can imagine all the ugly questions that could come out of that, right? That's not what I'm there for. I'm there so that cool heroes can fight zombies and giant rattlers and devil bats and all the crazy stuff that I'm interested in. That's that comic book fantasy background that I care about. Everything else, I will do my best to make sure everybody feels included and happy, have since the beginning. Sometimes I think we go a little nuts in that direction. That's my personal feeling, but this decision was entirely for me and my friends that I play with, who are of color, and who might feel weird in that situation. And that's not a price I have to pay, right? They do.
Yeah.
So I changed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can appreciate that answer 100%.
And I got beat up for it.
Yeah.
By people who generally share my my views on a lot of other things.
Yeah.
That's okay. I knew it.
But like you said in the beginning of the interview, inclusion and inclusion and respect is very important in any kind of gameplay or just a common rule in life. You know what I mean? Inclusion and respect. So
and at the end of the day too, what I really, because I did read your statement and I agreed with it, I really liked it is your creation at the end of the day.
Right.
It's you.
Absolutely.
You've made it. It's up to you, and I really respect that.
Well, thanks. And I get some people don't agree, and that's fine too. Somebody yesterday wrote it was like when they decided to cut all the additional books and so forth from Star Wars, right, and make them non-canonical.
Yeah.
And they said, Star Wars was no longer George Lucas's. It was, belonged to our culture or something. Well, maybe not. We could argue that all day probably. But Star Wars is 1,000 times bigger than Deadlands.
Mm-hmm.
If Deadlands ever gets that size, then maybe there's a better argument to be made. Happy to see that happen. But right now it's mine and it's going the direction I want it to.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, and I can totally appreciate that. As you are the creator, and whatever way you want to steer your creation is completely up to you.
Yeah, and not to beat a dead horse, I know you want to move on, but real quick too, when I created Deadlands, the South survived longer because I needed an antagonist to create friction and a war in the setting, right? And if you remember Josie Wales in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, that was a big part of those stories, that there was still this conflict and all this hatred and violence and ugliness going on between the people of the U.S. And that was important to the whole story of the Reckoners and Fear and Deadlands, right? But as the game matured, there are so many more interesting things now besides the North and the South that those really replace that need for the antagonist. And best of all, the war's just been over for 13 years in the new continuity. So if you want to have a bunch of redlegs running around terrorizing people, you can still do that. If you want to have a bunch of holdout Confederates running around, you can do that. Those stories can still be there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with your statement more. And I was just sitting here thinking, thinking about comic books, thinking about Deadlands, and it reminds me of the first time that I read Just a Pilgrim from Garth Ennis. That whole world, it's a game, it's fiction, it's let's just have some fun. Okay, anyway, we'll leave that there because I want to talk about Pinnacle Entertainment Group for a second. I'm very interested in the business side of things, and I know Ron is as well. So what inspired you to start Pinnacle Entertainment? And I think we read it was in '94. So could you give us kind of a brief synopsis of how it went from I'm going to make this game to let's start this business?
Sure. So when I owned a comic book store in Blacksburg, Virginia called Fun and Games, which is still there, although the owners have no idea all the people that used to own it, some of whom work in video games and all kinds of cool stuff. But we were playing a lot of historical miniatures. I was a big historical miniatures guy, and we were playing a lot of Game of Kings. Age of Reason, which was a 7 Years War game, and really got into that. But there were some things that were frustrating us about it. And then I really got into the colonial period, the British colonial period. You can see some of my stuff back here. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to play British and Zulus, and I couldn't find a good rule set for it. So I wrote one, and it was called Fields of Honor, and I needed a company if you're going to publish a set of rules. So I did that, and that actually sold really well, which was surprising for a little set of historical rules. And then my friend John Hopler had a World War II collectible card game called The Last Crusade that he wanted to publish. So that's why I called it Pinnacle Entertainment Group. I thought, well, my friends can own their properties and we'll just use this to publish our little pet projects, right? And I was already working as a freelancer for a lot of companies at that point. So I had some knowledge of what was going on, or at least I thought I did. And then later on, when the idea for Deadlands came, Pinnacle already existed and had a route to publish, and that was much more difficult in those days than it is now, of course. And And through the years, we got lucky. Deadlands was a big hit. And through the years, we've been able to stay in business. Things have changed a lot. Magic changed the industry. The D20 license changed the industry. Rise of PDS changed the industry. And then, of course, crowdfunding with things like Kickstarter.
Yeah.
So, if you have specific questions, be happy to answer them. But there's a lot of history there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just we could talk all day about how to create a company and how to start a business, right?
Yep.
But as Pinnacle has grown over the years and acquired more licenses, do you find that you're in more of a supervisory role when it comes to your baby Deadlands?
When it comes to Deadlands, probably so, but that's really only because Matthew Cutter, who had to recently resign because he's becoming a big famous author now of other books, was so good at running it through the plot point campaign era, which started with the Flood and ended with Good Intentions, the Hellstrom book, right? And those 4 books and all the stuff we made in between were just excellent by Matt. And I'm not a micromanager type. If somebody can do a better job than me, I'm happy to get out of their way and do other stuff. And that's what I did. I focused on more Savage Worlds and the rules stuff while Matt kept the continuity and the story of Deadlands going, and he did a great job. Now that he's stepped down, I'm kind of back into that seat, and we have freelancers who are working on different parts of it that I'm overseeing, but I still do a ton of writing and editing myself. Even when I didn't mention it, but I did a lot of computer game work. I was an executive producer on a couple of big games. Even when I did that, I would go home at night and edit manuscripts and give feedback and stuff while other people ran the company. So I'm pretty hands-on, for better or for worse.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of companies have been affected by COVID-19. Obviously, as we all know, it's kind of like the elephant in the room, right? Has it affected your company in any way with any kind of releases you may have, or say marketing, even at events like Gen Con and things like that have been shut down? I know they did online things, but me personally, if I'm going to a convention, I like to go and meet the creators and touch and feel and all that other stuff. Kind of hard to do that online.
Yeah, so I'll tell you, there's yes, it has, obviously. There's kind of a dirty little secret though. Game companies are doing really well during COVID. I know this firsthand from several other tabletop companies. I know it from several of my friends in the video game industry, and I'm not talking about artists and designers. I'm talking about the guys who run the place and have access to the books and pay the bills.
Mm-hmm.
So people are staying home and playing games. I'm doing the same. We're playing online constantly. I'm playing video games, etc. So financially, we're all doing pretty well. Maybe not everybody. Maybe if they're more reliant on retail than some of us are, maybe not so much. It has absolutely affected us in other ways, and that's not to say any of us want that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Obviously, yeah.
Sick or certainly worse. But where it has affected us is like Deadlands the Kickstarter was a huge hit, and wound up creating a ton of products for it. From maps, tokens, bennies, pawns, all the boxes, everything else. And our printers overseas, we have printers that we use in Europe and Asia and different places. Sometimes it just ravaged their offices, and that slowed things down a bit.
Yeah.
We try not to make any excuses or say anything. We always take that on ourselves because it's our job to manage it. But that has slowed things down here and there. As you mentioned, the convention circuit not being able to do live events has killed a couple of projects we just haven't talked about. We had a couple of board games we were going to do, but we really, because we're not a board game maker, we need to get out there and play them with people and make sure other people like what we're doing before we put any more money into it. So that's on hiatus. I think our Halloween event that we're doing right now and several of the other virtual cons that we have a new team that have been doing them. They used to do the Rocky Mountains. They are the Rocky Mountain Savages. And now we call them the Savage Worlds crew, con crew. And they're doing just tons of events at all kinds of different virtual conventions besides just our own, so that people can play the games, and talk to us and hear panels and ask questions and all that kind of stuff. So we're doing really well throughout all of this. We've had some setbacks. We certainly want it to end. We want life to go back to normal, but we've been very fortunate.
I was thinking too, there's a lot of barriers even for people when times are normal and traveling to these conventions. So having them online, also maybe brings in new demographics that wouldn't otherwise be able to get and see.
Yeah. And we didn't invest in all this to do it just for the COVID era. We want to do it afterwards because, one of the things you really realize from owning a store and then owning, your own publishing company is that it's pretty easy to find a group of people to play D&D in any town in America, probably, right? It's tougher to find somebody to play Savage Worlds. It's, it's just it's a couple of tiers below D&D. Still good, but it is. So having a place where people can play online from anywhere in the world is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think that one of the positives that have come out of this for any kind of industry is just how prevalent you can become online.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when people have time. Everyone has the internet. Or most people have the internet. Most people have a computer. And with me, I found myself all the time online because I can't go out and ask people or go to somewhere and try to find the answer for what I'm looking for. I can just go right here on my computer and boom, let's ask Google.
Right.
Let's watch some videos. Let's do something. And I did that too I do that all the time when I'm trying to learn different games, see how people play the game.
Yeah.
And see if there's a disconnect in the core rules that I'm reading, find out where it is by watching people play.
Yeah. I think probably the thing that I don't like about playing online is the way most of the audio systems work. So I've noticed this in a lot of the games that I've run or played in. If I'm talking and you try to talk, the microphone can only really funnel one of us properly, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas at the table, we can kind of talk over each other, and I mean politely, not like, in a rude way, right? And you can kind of focus or grok on whatever each person needs to pay attention to. But because we all have to wait, stop, make sure the other guy's not talking, etc., it kind of slows that energy down just a little bit, right? And there's ways to manage it, but that's really the only, the big drawback, other than just liking to be around people, which I do.
Yeah, I agree. So let's kind of bring this full circle before we start ending it here. Do have a few more questions for you. Comics. Go back to comics. So I noticed on the site that there are some games for two of my favorite comics that I met at Baltimore Comic-Con a few years back. One was Fear Agent, and the other was Goon. So Rick Remender and Eric Powell. Do they approach you and say, "Hey, I want to turn my book into a game," or is it something that maybe is from both sides? Say, "Hey, we like this as well. Let's see what we can do together."
So in the case of a different property, Sixth Gun, that we did by owning, they came to us.
Okay.
Once we did that one, I was a big fan of Fear Agent and the Goon, so I approached them.
Okay.
And I love those. I think those are some of the things I'm proudest of. The Goon, Matthew Cutter, the person I mentioned a few moments ago that ran Deadlands, he wrote the book. And to me, I think he channeled Eric Powell's voice, like he was a possessed demon or something. It's
yeah, the Goon, Hillbilly, all that stuff from Eric Powell. I love it. When I got to meet him at Baltimore Comic-Con, he did a sketch for me of Hillbilly, and I love it so much. I plan on hanging on the wall.
Just getting started on Hillbilly.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
And I don't know if you know this, but the Goon restarted under Eric's own imprint called Albatross.
I'm going to have to go to my local comic shop and check it out.
So no poser. They're right here, man.
Yeah, exactly. So you kind of hinted on one new thing. I think you called it Dark Ages.
Uh-huh.
Is there anything new and special on the horizon for Pinnacle Entertainment Group that you are at liberty to talk about?
Sure. So we did a big panel last night where I talked about this stuff for about half an hour. So if anybody wants to watch it,
we'll
for the
have to go to Twitch and
Halloween
check it out.
panel or something. But in brief, the most important things we're working on are the companions, which let you create your own worlds for fantasy, super, sci-fi, and horror. And then later on will be a martial arts companion. Those are really big for our crowd because Savage Worlds really does let you do anything. We just released a whole bunch of different 32-page adventures like Ripper's Amazon Expedition, South Pacific, Scavenger's Guide for Last Parsec. One of the really cool ones people might not have heard about is Dawn of the Daikaiju. You actually get to play giant monsters.
Cool.
So, our system now lets you play everything from a post-apocalyptic irradiated Twinkie to Godzilla. So Cool.
Running the whole spectrum.
Right? Holler was our big announcement for the weekend, which I mentioned earlier, and Tim is doing a panel on it right now in my other window. So if you can catch that, it was on Twitch. I guess it'll be up on YouTube soon. It's a really cool post. It's Appalachian apocalyptic nightmare. It's kind of a dark fantasy fairy tale kind of thing. We have a huge announcement in January we can't talk about yet, but stay tuned. It's big. And then we have all kinds of stuff coming for Deadlands, the Weird West. We will redo Deadlands Noir and Deadlands Hell on Earth for the newest edition of the rules soon. And then Deadlands Dark Ages, which you mentioned, we actually put out an adventure for it. I guess it's 2 years ago now, when the new edition of the rules came out. So you can find that on our site. I think it's called Sins of the Father. John Goff wrote that one and is writing the core book for Dark Ages, which will be later next year. And it does actually cycle around this whole weird Morgana cackler thing that I alluded to earlier.
Very interesting. Is there anything that you want to plug or share with us before we kind of say goodbye?
Well, I've plugged everything.
Yeah.
Actually, one last thing, we do have Legend of Ghost Mountain, which is really cool. It's a boxed set with a source book adventure and pawns in it. So we're starting to get into pawns now. Paizo does those really cool ones. We wanted to do the same because our game, does have this underlying miniatures crunch. So we're working on that. That's coming out. It's kind of a samurai horror fantasy setting. As for, parting shots, play everything, have fun. This is supposed to be a thing we do for fun and to explore other worlds, other people, all the things that, we read about in all these cool books. What's great about RPGs is you get to live them, right? You get to play them and just, have a blast. Go play in online cons if you can, whether they're our games or somebody else's. And then back when things are normal again, go to regular cons, meet other people, make new friends. It's a lifelong friendship when you can act like a sniveling kobold in front of your fellow man. So,
well,
awesome.
Thanks. I'm gonna go ahead and let Ron take us out.
Well, Shane, it's been a really it's been a pleasure speaking with you. You're a big inspiration for me and a lot of people I know, a lot of people on our server. So having this opportunity has been great. Deadlands really introduced me to this hobby. So for me and all the other Deadlands fans and the Savage World fans in general, just thank you for everything.
Well, thanks. I was glad to be on.
Yeah, and to echo Ron a bit, thanks a lot for speaking with us today. It was a long shot to contact you. It was a long shot, I thought, for you to contact me back. But I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful that you did, and it was very nice to pick your brain for just the little bit of time that we spent with you, and thanks for taking time. I know you have the Twitch thing going on today, and we want you to get back to that, but it really is an honor from us and the people in the server at Rollers of Relay to just be able to hear from you. Don't forget to visit www.peginc.com to find out more about Savage Worlds, Deadlands, and all the different games that they provide. And you can also follow them on Twitter at PEG_games. And if you want to find out more about the Rollers of Relay, play a game, host a game, or chat with the rest of the community, visit our link tree to find us on all forms of social media, our podcast and YouTube links, and our Ko-Fi page. So that's link.er.ee/Rollers of Relay. Thank you again, Shane. I really appreciate it. It's been an honor.
Pleasure's all mine. Thanks.
Thank you.